Well, hello there, all you musical fanatics on the interwebs. Zombo Skater here to discuss something that I've been getting questioned about a lot recently. It's been a long time since I last posted, and a lot has changed. My understanding of music has grown, and I've grown fond of music composition on an orchestrational level, which leads us into the topic at hand today. I've had many a friend and coworker that are either just getting into creating and or reading music, or just interested in the composition I've been making. And the gist of it is that they're not quite sure about how to read or interpret what it is they're seeing on the pages or screen in front of them. And thus I decided it was time I get back on the tubes of you and make a little tutorial vid concerning sheet music theory, with the possibility of diving into actual music theory in the weeks and months to follow. So stick around and I'll dive right into the wonderful world of sheet music and music theory. And as all of you YouTubers, and me, I guess, I'm a YouTuber too, would like to say, please subscribe to get more and more music theory videos, as well as feel free to comment below any positive criticisms or even ideas about what you would like to see in future vids. I'm super excited to tackle this wide world of music. Alright, enough of that. Let's get down to business. Okay, so what exactly is sheet music? Well, on your screen is an example of what sheet music is. And let's take a look at another example. Pretty sure you probably heard this one before. This is every pop song nowadays. Everyone has heard this. Oh my god, I can't stand this. Going to a different song right now. Sorry about that. And I'm pretty sure you've all probably heard this one as well. Dun 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 dun. Bum bum ba da ba da da bum 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 bum. I can only ever imagine Jack Black whenever I hear this anymore. Alright, and then finally, so here's an example of something that I've been working on lately. So I've taken Jimi Hendrix's Hey Joe, and I've turned it into an orchestra. I've also been recently working on Yngwie Malmsteen's Far Beyond the Sun. But so what I've done here as an example of what we're going to be doing with sheet music in the weeks to come is I've taken the background vocals, put it on flute, and taken Jimi Hendrix's vocals, put it on clarinet, and then I've used two violins and the right hand of a piano to simulate the two guitars, and then the left hand on the piano and the cello to simulate the bass guitar. And then right now the drums are just your typical rock drums, but they will eventually become more orchestral in nature. But to give you an example of things to come, this is what this sounds like. So in a nutshell, all of this is just a standardized, to a point, way of displaying pitch and rhythm, of a particular piece of music, so that the whole world will be able to, see this, read it, understand it, and then play it. There are a few versions that are kind of crazy and out there that a few eccentric composers have begun using, but for the other 99% of us, we are only ever going to be looking at the kind of sheet music that you see here. So that being said, let's get into a few definitions of words that I've already previously mentioned. So the two words I'd like to define are pitch and rhythm. These are the two most essential things that sheet music is used for. Pitch is which notes to play, be them high or low sounding in value. And my example here starts off on a middle C and works its way ascending up to a higher C an octave above. And it also works going from the high C, descending down to that middle C. So that is pitch, the difference in tonality between one note to the next. Rhythm, however, is the duration of a note to play, and when combined with other notes, gives a sense of time and groove, i.e. a rhythm. And I've got a little example of that here. So you can see when combined, both pitch and rhythm lend itself well to making what sounds like a song. And it also gives the ability for anyone that's looking at this music to discern what the song should potentially sound like. So before we get into the first symbol you see displayed on the lines, let's discuss the weird horizontal and vertical lines I've been writing on. Sheet music is written, let me get this centered for you. Sheet music is written with 5 lines for each staff. And the staff is going to be the clef symbol that's at the very beginning that we will discuss here in a little bit. Coincidentally, these lines are called staff lines. Catchy, right? There's a staff symbol with staff lines. Notes are written on and in between these 5 lines. So you can see I've kind of typed up a quick example of where notes may be. So I've got an E, G, B, D, F on the lines, and then F, A, C, E written between the lines. Alright, let's get into discussing these symbols. So the symbols at the beginning are called clefs, and it's going to denote what notes are played, what pitches of notes are played per instrument. The top symbol right here is called a treble clef or a G clef. Think of this as the right hand used on a piano or a violin or a guitar or a flute. They're the higher pitch sounding notes. So starting on middle C. The next symbol is called a bass clef or an F clef. Think of this as the left hand on a piano, and excuse my cats, good gravy. Cats are going crazy in the background. But so the bass clef, once again, it's think of it as the left hand for piano or a cello or a bass guitar or even a bassoon. So starting on middle C, you're going to hear them go much lower in pitch. This third symbol is called an alto clef. An alto clef is used for things like a mandolin or instruments that kind of fall in between both the bass and the treble clef. So the middle C is actually the very middle line, and then it goes ascending up and descending down the lines. So sounding together, starting with a treble clef, moving into bass, and then in the alto clef, you'll see the difference in between these pitches. Let me move this over for you. So typically instruments only ever use just one clef based on their limited instrumentation. However, as we are going to probably be using piano quite a bit for our examples, you'll see that with a piano it becomes a little bit different, and it's called a grandstaff. Both the treble and the bass clef are combined using this little bracket to indicate that both of these are played with that particular instrument. And like I said before, left hand is going to be your bass clef and right hand is going to be your treble clef. Now the great thing about the grandstaff is that it makes it easier to visualize the relationship of both the treble and the bass clef. In most music theory lessons, the instructor will always begin everything with a discussion about middle C on a piano, and all scale and theory will be centered around that middle C. As you can see here, this is the middle C in the treble. Sounds exactly the same as middle C on a bass. And they're actually written on the same line. So here's where we can move into the next bit of info concerning lines on a sheet music. Did you notice how when I played the middle C, it put it on a spot not located on the staff lines? Well, that is because middle C is not a staff line note. It is a ledger line note. So basically any note played above or below the staff lines will be called ledger lines. The importance of middle C is that it is exactly one line below the treble clef and one line above the bass clef. Unless you're playing on an alto clef, then middle C is the very middle of the staff lines, and your ledger lines will go above and below the typical 5. Can you tell where I'm going with this? Essentially, once you play the middle C with either hand, in essence, if you were to continue downwards from the treble clef, you're now technically playing the notes on the bass clef, and if you were to go upwards from the middle C on the bass clef, well, you're now getting into treble clef territory. The only difference is that you were using ledger lines instead of changing the clef displayed. Ledger lines can sometimes be difficult to quickly see exactly what note you are playing, but over time as you read and play more sheet music, you'll be able to easily, almost instantaneously, know exactly what note that is. But the easiest way most people learn these notes is through the use of a few abbreviations. But first, here's some examples of some ledger lines. So on the treble clef, this is starting off on G above the staff lines, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and then moving below the treble clef staff lines, this was a D, C, B, A, G, F, E, D. So technically, this note right here, which is an A, is technically the first staff line of a bass clef. So now the abbreviations that I just mentioned, there's a few different ways to think of this, but this is kind of what most people have probably learned if you've ever learned about the different pitches and where they sit on the staff lines. So every good boy does fine, or every good boy deserves food. So E, G, B, D, F are on the lines, and then F, A, C, E is in between the staff lines, spells face. Pretty easy to recognize. For the bass clef, you have a G, B, D, F, A are on the lines, so grizzly bears don't fear anything. Grizzly bears don't fear anything. And then in between the lines, A, C, E, G. You have to learn your own acronym for that one. I just remember them as ACE G. And then for the alto clef, the easiest way to picture anything above and below is just that very middle line is middle C. So then you can just go up and down from there. But we really won't deal with the alto clef too much. Alright, moving on from the clefs, we're going to start discussing a little bit about pitch. I guess now would be a good time to discuss that in modern Western music, we have 12 tones. So earlier we mentioned the word pitch. Pitch is a certain frequency that you sing or play, i.e. the degree higher or lower of a particular tone you hear. Tone is just the base frequency that we actually hear. Then based on that vibration at a faster or lower speed, you'll get higher or lower pitches. For instance, concert tuning of instruments is the A tone at 440 Hz. So if we cut the frequency in half to 220 Hz, we get another A tone, just at a lower pitch. Typically we call these higher or lower pitches octaves of the basic tone. Another musical term you may have heard is called timbre, and we'll get into that in a second, but first let me show you what that means. So concert A sounds like this. Now if I was to cut that concert A in half, we're going to get, so that's still an A note, it's just a lower pitched A note. Now if we were to go the other direction and multiply concert A at 440 Hz by 2, you get 880 Hz for an octave up A. So, all A's, just at a different pitch. Now for timbre, let us move over to this sheet music. So another, like I said, another musical term you may have heard is called timbre, which is the certain quality or color of a tone depending on the instrument and how it's played. For example, you can play the same tone, say on like a saxophone or a flute, a violin, a guitar, and while the tone stays the same, the timbre is greatly different. So for instance, all of these are notes played in the exact same point or pitch, but on different instruments. And with a flute, you're going to get C, E, G, E. But if I was to play that on a violin, you'll hear that it's the same pitch, but much different timbre. And a guitar, or with a saxophone, or the piano right hand, piano left hand is going to sound exactly the same as the right hand, and a cello. And if I was to play all of this together, you can really tell that they're all the same note, but very different quality and feeling. And that's going to be important when it comes to orchestration, as you want to make sure that not only are you playing instruments within their range and capability, but also how do they sound towards each other. Like a viola is going to sound lower in quality and not as bright. It's going to be a little bit muddy compared to like a violin played at the same exact tonality. The saxophone is going to be rough and blunt and in your face. The guitar is going to be kind of distorted. And you've got to figure out, if I'm playing all these instruments together, I don't want them all playing the same pitch of a note. Otherwise, some may just override others. So you have to kind of figure out what level of pitches do you want to play, so that way you can clearly hear all the different instruments. So most people can visualize a piano with its black and white keys. Thus far, all we have talked about are the white keys, which are called whole tones. And that would be like your B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, so on and so forth. Those are just whole tones, due to the fact that they're typically a whole step away from each other. Each step from a white key to a black key to a white key to a black key are called half steps, and if you skip a key and move over, it's called a whole step. But when we begin to add in the black keys, we're going to get what are called sharps and flats. And I've got examples of these back over here. So you'll notice the little symbol in the front. The pound sign indicates a sharp note, and the little lowercase kind of italic B is a flat note. Now these two notes are exactly the same. We have a D sharp and an E flat. Notice they sound exactly the same. It's just a different way of writing them. And we'll get more into this when it comes to making our scales and writing out certain pieces of music. It kind of becomes important on which you decide to pick and choose. Like, am I going to use a D sharp instead of an E flat? But right now, it's not as important. All we're worried about is just showing you the symbol. So basically, this example right here is just showing you, starting off on middle C, all the examples kind of going up of where you're going to use sharps and flats. So C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E, F, F sharp, G, G sharp, A sharp, B, C. And then it goes B, B flat, A flat, G, G flat. And I'm probably getting off the screen here. F, E, E flat, D, D flat, C. And you'll notice that between E and F, you don't technically have a sharp or a flat, because an F flat would be an E and an E sharp would be an F. There are times when we're going to actually use a sharp or a flat symbol for these. Same with B to C. B sharp would be a C and C flat would be a B. But we'll get into when you would actually want to call a C a flat and a B a sharp, or E a sharp and an F a flat, when we start working on scale theory and chord theory. And if you listen to the difference going up between a whole tone and a higher pitch note, you get what is called that half step difference that I've mentioned about with the piano. And the opposite is true with the flatted notes. You know, if you're going from a white key to a black key, or between C and B, or F and E, that's a half step, even though those are just white keys. Alright, now before I mention the important thing that adding in these sharps or flats have on music, we must insert a brief discussion on the bar lines, because once we start writing music, you're going to see me putting in these different symbols in various different parts of the music, and this is basic sheet theory, so these are going to be very important when it comes to typing up your music. So if you see just a single line like this right here on the vertical, that's used to just separate the rhythmic sections. So, if you saw a certain amount of notes here, like these 4 quarter notes, and then the line, that means you have 4 beats, that ends a measure, and then you're going to go into the next 4 beats, so on and so forth. If you see 2 lines here, these are used to separate kind of like your ideas or changes. Like, say you're going from your intro to your first verse, from your first verse to your chorus. These are just kind of a help, like, hey, I'm going from my intro to my chorus, or my intro to my verse, so on and so forth. So it separates the ideas. When you see the thin line followed by the big fat black line, that actually indicates the end of the song. Unless you're using these symbols here, because you can see that this has a thin and a fat line, so it does indicate an end. However, in most cases, you'll see these kind of like in the middle of a song, and when you have 2 dots that are facing to the right of the fat and thin line, that indicates the start of a section to be repeated. And then if you have one of these, you're going to have the opposite, which will be the 2 dots facing left, and that indicates the end of the section to be repeated. So everything between these 2 symbols would be played multiple times. Typically, if there's no number above the ending repeat sign, then you just play it twice and then move on. Sometimes you'll see this symbol right here, which is basically just these 2 repeats combined, but it just indicates this is the end of a repeat section and the start of yet another repeated section. Okay, now where was I with sharps and flats? Oh yeah. So once you place a sharp or a flat in front of a particular note, that note will retain its value of being a flat or sharp throughout the measure or bar, if you will. So an example of this is you see that I've typed in an F sharp. Now, when you go from an F sharp, you'll notice that the next note doesn't have the sharp symbol. However, because I put the sharp symbol there, every note following is going to be an F sharp until you get to the next measure. Then it goes back to being natural. So you can hear the difference there. So once you start the next measure, the note that you've sharped in the previous measure will revert back to its natural state, and in order for you to once again make it sharp, you have to put the symbol back. And then you'll notice this symbol right here. This just indicates inside a measure, if I don't want to have that particular note sharped anymore, I can put this kind of little boxy weird symbol, and that indicates the natural. So you'll notice here in this measure I go from an F to an F sharp back to an F again. Now, one thing to note is that inside measures like this, so in this case I've got two different styles of Fs. So I've got a lower F and a higher pitch F sharp, and you'll notice that this F does not have a sharp symbol in front of it. So for every F that you have in a particular measure, if you want them to be sharped, you have to put the symbol in front of it, like I had to do here. And the same is true if you have a higher pitch F. So like I've got an F sharp here. This F will not be sharped just because this F is. You have to put the symbols in there. Which then moves us into the next point, key signatures. So say you want to use a particular scale for a song, there's a nice way to be able to indicate what notes are going to be sharped throughout the entire piece of music. So instead of having to go through and put the sharp symbols or the flat symbols or the natural symbols throughout the entire song, we use what's called key signatures. And that's going to be displayed right next to the clef at the very beginning of a song. And it's going to indicate what notes in a particular scale are used as sharps or flats. So in the case of the first one here, you'll notice I have just one sharp symbol, and it's on the F note, so every F. Not like how we had before where you had to put every F or every G or every E or whatever you had to put the sharp symbol for. This means that all Fs, regardless of pitch, will be sharp throughout. And this is a G major E minor scale. Next example we have is we have a C and an F are sharp, and that's going to be a D major or a B minor scale. And we'll get into these scales in a later video. And then, of course, we've got an example of a B. So this is a B flat, and this is F major or D minor. And then we've got a whole hell of a lot of flats. We're talking F flat, G flat, A flat, B flat, C flat, D flat, E flat. Almost everything is flat there. Actually, everything is flat there. And that's a C flat major or an A flat minor scale. So that just indicates that I never have to put the sharps or flats throughout the entire rest of the song unless I'm using what's called an incidental, which would mean that I want a note that's not from that scale to be played. So I'd have to use a natural symbol or a sharp or a flat wherever one's not used. Alright, there's just two more important bits of basic sheet music info to cover. So far we've been talking about the pitch of a piece of music and pretty much nothing else. Pitch is by far the most important thing in a piece of music. It's sometimes tricky to figure out what note a person is playing unless you are blessed with the ears and mind of a perfect pitch and can instantly hear what frequency a note is and call it out. But with sheet music, that tone and pitch is written precisely for you, so there's no confusion as to what note to play. That leads us into what is referred to as time signature, or rhythm of the piece of music. Rhythm is the hardest part to learn, but things like the time signature and the way notes are strung together on a piece of sheet music can aid greatly into the understanding of how a song will feel rhythmically. Time signatures are always displayed with two numbers. As you can see here, there's a 4 and a 4. And this will always be right next to the clef and the key signature at the beginning of a piece of music, unless at a particular measure you change up your time signature, and then you'll have that indication, wherever in the music it changes. So the top number indicates how many of a particular beat to play per measure, while the bottom number indicates the value of the beats that will be played. So in the examples I have below, you're going to see 4x4, which is by far the most common that you'll ever see. It's most pop music, most rock music, a lot of classical music, and it's the standard that most people learn to play. So 4x4 means that every one of these notes is going to get the value of a quarter note, and there's going to be 4 quarter notes played. So what we have here is an example that shows it goes 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's our beats per measure. And then I've got a little example here showing how if you use different notes, you're still in 4x4. So it's 1 and 2, 3 and E4. 1 and 2, 3 and E4. So this is kind of what it sounds like. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, and now we're getting to the next example. So the next example is kind of what most people would think of as a waltz, and that's called 3/4. So once again, we're still using quarter notes as our measure of beats, but we're only doing 3 beats per measure. So this gets a 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. So you get that waltz feel. 1 and 2, 3 and E, 1 and 2, 3 and E, 1 and 2, 3 and E. So it gives you kind of a waltzy kind of feel, whereas the other one is just more straightforward. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And then the last little example here, and there's very, very many different versions of this. Depending on if you're listening to prog rock or classical music or whatnot, you're gonna get various different versions of this. This one right here is used a lot, kind of in jazzier kind of music, with a real big swing groove. And this is 1/8 notes. So now instead of quarter notes, this is a 6/8. Which means that every note is getting an 1/8 note value, but there's only 6 of them in the measure. So yes, if you do math, the fraction 6/8 also equals 3/4, but because of the way it's played, it doesn't give it that waltz feel. It gives more of a groove feel. 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and. Whereas the waltz is 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So you kind of see the little groove there. And so just to show that, over here, you're going to kind of hear the same quarter note pattern as the waltz, but it's going to sound a bit different. 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and. We'll play that again. 1 and 2 and 3 and. So those are just ways that we can use a time signature to not only show the rhythm of a piece, but also the pitch of a piece to help make an actual song. So basically, time signatures make you do math. Yikes. Now this section leads us to our final topic for this video. We've talked about pitch and rhythm, but how exactly do we get the pitches and rhythm mentioned above to sound like a song? Well, you may have noticed in a few examples I've given, the notes look very different from one another. That is because each of the notes written are of a different and varying duration. These differences are what gives us our groove, or waltzy feel, or solid rock feel. Now notes come in 2 forms, either played or not played, or as commonly the not played are called, rests. So here's how they're written. And you'll see lots of these, and they actually go below the values that I've given, but these are the major ones that we'll probably always be working with, as below some of these values just gets way too fast and hard to hear on recordings. So this is a whole note rest, which means for this entire 4x4 measure, nothing is played. This is half note, and you'll notice the whole note and half note look similar, just whole note faces downwards and half note faces upwards from the B note there. Then you got a quarter note, an 1/8 note, which has just one little dot and line, and a 16th note, which has 2 little dots on a line. Now a 32nd note will just be 3 dots on a line, 64th would be 4 dots on a line, 1/28 will be 5 dots on a line, so on and so forth if you want to get crazy. And then the played notes are going to have whole note as a donut, Half note is a donut with a line. Quarter note is filled in with a line. Eighth note is filled in with a line with a little loopy. And the 16th note is 2 lines. So as you can start to see the rest in the actual played notes, you'll notice similarities. 2 dots, 2 lines. A 32nd note would have the dot and then with 3 lines. And that's pretty much what you're going to be seeing. So we've already had an examples here, like up on this 3x4, you've got 2 eighth notes, quarter note, eighth note, 2 16th notes. So if you're good at math, 2 16th notes makes an eighth note, 2 eighth notes makes a quarter note. And that's how we're going to use to build up all of our songs. Well, I think we've covered quite a hefty bit of information, and thus we've come to the end of the discussion for today. It's been a long ride. Next week we will begin to cover the stranger markings you sometimes will encounter throughout a musical piece, like weird curvy lines and wavy lines and dots and words and letters, etc., etc. These markings are expressions of how a song feels beyond just pitch and rhythm, and are of equal importance to how to write and play music. I hope everyone enjoyed this tutorial, and please feel free to leave and write any comments and feedback, or if you have questions or would like to just see a particular topic discussed, feel free to comment that as well. Until next time, this has been Zombo Skater, and I wish you all the most wonderfully musically rich life.